So how do you master the seemingly difficult but important jazz song form, rhythm changes? Well, today I'm going to show you 8 simple steps to do exactly that coming up. Rhythm changes is a common song form used in jazz. It's based off of George Gershwin's I Got Rhythm, but artists like Charlie Parker, Sonny Rollins, and many others have created melodies over top of this important song form. And therefore it's really important to know if you want to be a great jazz musician, jazz improviser, and really if you master rhythm changes, it's going to help you in all of the rest of your other jazz playing. So step number 1 is to learn the chords and understand them. Now this might seem like an obvious first step, but honestly, we're not going to be great improvisers if we don't really know these chord changes really well and understand how they harmonically work. So taking a look at rhythm changes, we're looking actually at the head oleo, but these are just the chord changes here. So we have B flat major 7, G7, C minor 7, and F7, and that's a 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression. And now this is super important that you understand what that means. We're in the key of concert B flat major, and what we're essentially saying is that the 6th chord within the key center of B flat major is G. Now we're making it a G7. That's called a secondary dominant, meaning that it's tonicizing this C minor, the 2 chord, but in general, the G in rhythm changes is going to be a dominant 7th chord, the 6th chord. So B flat major 7, G7, C minor 7 is the 2 chord, and F7 is the 5 chord. If you understand Roman numeral analysis, this is going to be super helpful. Moving on, we have D minor 7, which is the 3 chord, to a G7, the 6, and then a 2 and a 5 again. Now going back to bar 5 now, we go back to our 1 chord, that's B flat major, and then we do some blues harmony here. So we go 1 to the 4, which is E flat 7, to this E diminished 7, that's a sharp 4 diminished, blues harmony right there, and then a 1, 6, 2, 5. This is the main chord progressions that are in rhythm changes. So while rhythm changes is a 32 bar form, just knowing these 8 bars is pretty much going to get you 75% of the way there. We go on to the second A section here, which is bars 9 through 16, and really it's just a repeat of the first A section, other than just ending on a 2, 5, 1 to kind of end out that phrase. Now going into the bridge is where it gets kind of fun and interesting. Instead of a billion chords going by, we actually have chords that last 2 bars each. So we start with this D7, which is actually just a dominant 3 chord, to a G7, which is that dominant 6 chord we've been talking about from the A sections, to the C7, which is a dominant 2 chord, to F7, the 5 chord. So basically all we're doing is we're doing a 3, 6, 2, 5. We're just making them all dominant 7th chords. So this really provides a challenge for improvising over, because you have these stagnant dominant 7th chords that don't really move quickly. So you have to figure out some creative musical solutions to play over top of these. Now finishing off the tune is the last A section, which is essentially just a copy of the first A section. So again, as long as you know these A sections, you're pretty much going to be most of the way there to understanding how rhythm changes works. Step number 2 is to learn a rhythm changes head. Now there are tons of melodies, we call them heads for rhythm changes. You have Charlie Parker heads like Anthropology, and you have a head like this, which is Oleo by Sonny Rollins. So you want to learn a rhythm changes head. Oleo is a great one. Ultimately, you want to repeat this step over many different times. I think it's a good idea to have in your arsenal at least 5 rhythm changes heads that you're able to play. And not only is this important to be able to play the melody to a rhythm changes so you can actually perform the tune, but there's actually a lot of great musical information involved in these, especially if you learn bebop heads like Anthropology and so on and so forth over top of rhythm changes. So learn a rhythm changes head and repeat this process over many different times. Now, step number 3 is where we really have to start tackling the problem of how do we actually improvise over these really fast moving chord progressions, right? Because this is really the hardest part. What I hear from a lot of students is, how do you improvise over chords that are going by this fast? Do I play every single note? What do? I can't play this quickly. I can't think this quickly. Well, we need to start breaking it down. And so step number 3 is to learn and memorize and really ingrain the chord tones. Okay, so the chord tones are the first place I always start with improvising, because really at the end of the day, they are the core structures of the chords that we're trying to play. So if we get really good at chord tones, we're going to be really, really well off. Just take a look at these first 2 bars of this chord tone map. It's B flat major 7, G7, C minor 7, F7. That's that 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression that just repeats itself all the time. So we really need to master this in rhythm changes. And so all we're gonna do is start by walking up that B flat major 7 arpeggio. So root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, right? Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. And then what I want to do is I want to connect this to the nearest chord tone of the G7, the 6th chord. And in this particular case, I'm going to choose the note G. That's the root. So now we're going to go root to the 7th, to the 5th, to the 3rd. Okay, so walking them down. And I like to do it this way. We call this voice leading, because really when we're improvising, we're not just going up the arpeggios like that from the root on up. We're trying to connect lines and melodies together. So this is a good exercise to do. So now up that C minor 7, I'm going to connect it right here to the root again because it's a close tone. So we have C, which is the root, and the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And then I'm going to connect to this F7, the 5 chord, with this A natural note. Okay, so A natural, that's the 3rd. So we're going to go 3rd, root, 7th, and then 5th. Okay, so all in all, the way I've played these chord tones over top of this 1, 6, 2, 5 sounds like this. Right? And even just by playing this, you can already hear the chord changes starting to come out. If you're a guitar player like me, play this in a couple of different positions. If you're a saxophone player, trumpet player, piano player, play these in different octaves as well. And also figure out different ways that you can connect chord tones together. So for example, instead of starting on the root like we do on the B flat major 7th, you could actually start on the 3rd and build out and connect the chord tones that way. So the better you get at this, the easier it's going to be for you to start navigating these fast moving chord changes. Now, step number 4 is to master guide tones over rhythm changes. So guide tones are the 3rds and the 7ths of each chord. And the reason why I always like to tell my students to focus on guide tones at some point in time is because these are the notes that we want to be thinking about resolving to in our solos. They're really the notes that will make the chord changes pop. It's like putting spice into your food or salt, right? It's really going to make the flavors pop. And that's kind of what guide tones do as well. So it's not necessarily that we want to solo like this, but we want to get into the habit of being able to identify them on our instrument so that we're comfortable starting to create lines around these guide tones. So for example, again, over the first 2 bars, B flat major 7, G7, C minor 7, F7, the 3rd is going to be D over top of that B flat major 7. And then we have A, which is the 7th. So 3rd, 7th. And then we're going to connect up using voice leading to the G7. We're going to go up to the B natural, and that's the 3rd. So we're going to go 3rd, 7th over the G7. So, and then over the C minor 7, we have this E flat note. So that's the 3rd. And then B flat is the 7th. And then over the F7, we have A to E flat, right? So that's the 3rd to the flat 7. So it sounds like this. Again, play this in different octaves, play this in different positions, depending on what instrument you play. But just getting into the habit of identifying these, not only does this take your note choices way down, so you have to worry about playing a bunch of notes over these chords, it's gonna help you start thinking about important notes to resolve to. Now, step number 5 is to get really good at using approach notes, okay? So instead of thinking about scales or big, long, linear things to play over top of rhythm changes, it's way more beneficial to think about what are those important notes, those chord tones or those guide tones, and how do I approach them in order to start creating musical lines. So again, just taking a look at these first 2 bars on this approach tone map, we actually study it in our Rhythm Changes Accelerator course in our Inner Circle membership. We see that we have these arrows, and these represent what our target notes are. So target notes are simply the notes that we want to resolve to. So you'll notice that oftentimes these are really just chord tones or guide tones that we're trying to target, which is why we studied those. But what we're going to do is use approach tones. So really any note in this is an approach tone. An approach tone is just approaching a target note, but I like to really focus on the two notes that come before it, right? So in this particular case, we have this B flat major 7 to this G7. So we have F, G, A, C, B natural. So, okay, so we're targeting this B natural, that's the third over G7, by going A, C, B. And you'll notice that the A is lower in pitch than our target note, and the C is higher in pitch than our target note. And we call this enclosure, and that's a really common approach tone strategy that beboppers use. So, okay. Then our next approach tone is here, and we have above, below, and arriving with an F and a D and an E. So it sounds like this. Okay, again, we call this an enclosure. So starting from the B flat major, we have, and then we're arriving at this A natural over the F7. Okay, the A natural. Again, that's the third of the F7, so that's our target note. And we approach it with a G and a B. So below and above, approaching this target note. So this entire line sounds like this. Okay, so you can hear we're already starting to turn these chord tones and these guide tones into actual musical lines when we're using approach tones, whether they're diatonic or chromatic. So far we've been really focusing on the theoretical side of improvising, the technical side, which is really important. It's really helpful. But at the end of the day, we really need to start learning some actual language to play over top of the chord progressions of rhythm changes. So that's why step number 6 is actually to learn a rhythm changes solo. Now you can learn an etude like this particular etude that we study in our Rhythm Changes Accelerator course in our Inner Circle membership, or you can learn a solo off of a recording that you really like. Now you can also learn smaller bits of information, like just over top of this 1-6-2-5 if you want to, right? Because that's going to be a really powerful line to learn. Now, for example, this could be really handy when we come to the bridge right here, like with the D7, that's our 3 dominant chord, and then the G7, right, our dominant 6 chord. And what kind of musical lines can we play over top of this? So a good idea is to go to a pro and really hear what some good lines sound like to give yourself some ideas. Here's what this particular line sounds like. Right? Over top of that 3 and over top of that 6. So really nice, beautiful line, super melodic, lots of approach tones in there, lots of chord tones in there. So really interesting. And you don't even at this step need to analyze it if you don't want to, right? It's more just like getting it in your ear and internalizing it, and sure, if you want, taking it to other keys to further internalize it. But you can also analyze it. For example, that C sharp at the end on that G7 is actually the sharp 11. So we're actually targeting, instead of a chord tone in this example, we're targeting an altered extension, that sharp 11. So when we start analyzing, yes, we can start understanding better what this musician's doing, but more importantly is exposing ourselves to these different ideas so that they can come out hopefully in our solos later. Speaking of getting these ideas to come out in our solos later, step number 7 is to compose your own rhythm changes solo. Now, this is something I always recommend to my students in my inner circle because we really want to focus on slowing the improvisation process down, allowing ourselves to take the things that we've learned, right? Like in our chord tone maps or our approach tones or our etudes that we're learning, and actually make them into our own musical melodic ideas. And by slowing the improvisation process down, it gives us the opportunity to do that. I would recommend actually composing a 32 bar solo over top of the form. Like for example, over the 1-6-2-5, I might come up with a melodic idea like this. Right? It's just a very simple. maybe that's something that I'm hearing in my head. So by composing that, not necessarily writing down, but at least memorizing, it starts to allow that music that you're hearing in your head to come out onto your instrument and solidify it for yourself. Now, step number 8 is just to practice improvising over rhythm changes a lot. So after we've done all of this work, this heavy lifting, we just need to expose ourselves and allow ourselves to make mistakes as much as possible over top of rhythm changes so that we can learn from those mistakes, so that we can continually get used to navigating these waters, which are rhythm changes. And so if we're not actually going out and improvising, putting on backing tracks, going out with other people and playing rhythm changes, we're not going to be getting as good at it as we possibly could, or at least not as quickly as we would like to. But hey, going back and speaking of learning solos of rhythm changes, I always recommend actually doing it by ear if you really truly want to get that stuff internalized for yourself. So I have a video on the screen right now. It's called How to Learn a Jazz Solo by Ear, Step by Step. I walk you through my entire process of doing that to make it as easy as possible. And yes, you can absolutely do it. So click that on the screen right now to watch that video. Make sure you like this video if you found it valuable. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.